Let me start with the economy and a basic fact. The United States of America, right now, has the strongest, most durable economy in the world. We're in the middle of the longest streak of private sector job creation in history. More than 14 million new jobs, the strongest 2 years of job growth since the 1990s, an unemployment rate cut in half. Our auto industry just had its best year ever. Anyone claiming that America's economy is in decline is peddling fiction. I like talking about hope and all the good stuff that was going on, and then you look at some of these ads and it's some doom and some gloom. It's like everybody's running around and saying, you know, America's in decline and everything's scary and let's find somebody to blame. And the point I wanted to make, the core thing I wanted to say last night was, that's not the spirit that brought America so far. That's not how we traveled so far.
Stocks rocked and consumers shaken. But the president saying everything is just fine.
Anyone claiming that America's economy is in decline is peddling fiction.
The GOP presidential candidates painting a very different picture at the FBN debate.
The numbers just don't add up. We have the lowest percentage of Americans working today of any year since 1977. Median wages have stagnated.
Have regulations, I mean, come on, they're affecting everybody here, particularly our small businesses.
We are on the verge of being the first generation of Americans that leave our children worse off than ourselves.
In this country, people are concerned about their economic future.
How about Obamacare, a certified job killer?
Get our economy moving again and growing at a much higher rate.
Middle-class incomes have stagnated.
Middle class may notice it when they get to the cash register and everything is costing more money.
So who's got it right?
Stock market's off to its worst ever start to a new year, in large part because of collapsing oil prices. The Dow closed the week down nearly 400 points on Friday, about 2%, and leaving the index below 16,000. The S&P 500 index lost 41 points, or just over 2%. The Nasdaq was off 126 points, or more than 2.5%.
Plunging oil prices, sliding stock markets. 2016 doesn't begin off to a great start, with storm clouds gathering over the global economy.
Price of oil has dropped again.
Oil prices, they plunge. Dropping price of oil.
So is it going to be a big, long, rainy season, or is there any light on the end of the horizon there? Well, we asked investor and financial commentator Jim Rogers what we should expect.
First thing you need to learn is don't listen to governments, don't listen to bureaucrats, and don't listen to politicians. They always say everything is okay. There were people who before 2008 said it was going to end badly. There have been people since who said it's going to end badly. So just start learning your own judgment, your own ideas, because the idea that the solution to more debt, to too much debt, is more debt and more spending is ludicrous. It's ludicrous that grown-ups would stand there and say something like that, and yet that's what governments all over the world have been doing. It's going to be worse than 2008, though. You're going to see bankruptcies. The debt is much higher all over the world now. Even China now has a lot of debt, which it did not have in 2008. No, I'm afraid you're going to see a lot of problems. Everybody's debt has gone through the roof. Money has been printed. Be worried.
Now, the price of crude oil is falling to its lowest level since 2003, causing global markets to sink sharply. International benchmark Brent crude closed below $30 a barrel. The drop in oil prices caused US stocks to fall over 2%. European shares also fell to their lowest since December 2014. British, French, German and Italian equities all shed about 3% at the end of another troubled week for global markets. Falling oil prices have been blamed on persistent oversupply and weak Chinese economic data. Saudi Arabia is also widely believed to have destabilized the market through overproduction. Experts predict that oil prices could slump further once Iran is back to the market after the implementation of its nuclear deal with the P5+1.
Get to this point, ladies and gentlemen, Iran has undertaken significant steps that many, and I do mean many, people doubted would ever come to pass. And that should be recognized, even though the full measure of this achievement can only be realized by assuring continued full compliance in the coming years. In return for the steps that Iran has taken, the United States and the EU will immediately lift nuclear-related sanctions, expanding the horizon of opportunity for the Iranian people.
Oil giant BP has announced plans to axe 4,000 jobs worldwide over the next 2 years. Now, BP said it will reduce the number of its staff from 24,000, that is, to 20,000 by the end of 2017. BP's North Sea activities will be among the hardest hit, with 600 job losses. That means 1 in 5 people working in the North Sea will lose their jobs. In a statement, the company announced that the decision was made in response to nosediving of prices. The fresh cuts come a year after the company slashed 4,000 jobs as it prepared for a prolonged period of low crude prices.
We feel we are not yet prepared sufficiently for this fourth industrial revolution. And the danger is, you know, all this word of creative destruction. I'm convinced that we will destroy, unfortunately, a lot of employment. Just think of self-guided cars and all the drivers losing their jobs. Let's look at the bank employees and so on.
Poverty, homelessness and many other forms of social exclusion continue to affect millions of citizens living in the Eurozone. The economic crisis in the 19-member bloc began in 2008 and so it has now entered its 8th year. Eurozone finance ministers, known as the Eurogroup, have been meeting in Brussels to assess the situation. They insist that the economy is slowly improving, but concede that the International Monetary Fund has told them that crucial work remains undone.
The IMF was also very clear that we have far too little shock absorption capacity in our economies, both on the public and private side, that the pace of reform is a concern for the IMF and remains a key priority, and of course the completion of the banking union.
Regarding Greece, the Eurogroup has told Athens to speed up pension reforms and adjustments to the country's 2016 budget in order to unlock an €86 billion bailout agreed last summer. More generally speaking, analysts say that the Eurozone's economy is so slow to pick up pace because of a weak exports market.
There is quite low external demand from Asia or the US, so that private consumption in the core of the Eurozone is still the main growth driver for the moment. So if unemployment remains too high for too long, well, then that could be a risk for growth.
Analysts say that a changing political landscape in the Eurozone could also have major consequences. Most of the politicians currently in power in the EU are from mainstream political parties. But analysts say that the electorate, the people who are entitled to vote, have lost faith in them. And it's likely to lead to a rise in far-left and far-right Eurosceptic politics. It means that the future for the Eurozone and the EU as a whole has never been so uncertain.
The Arab Spring, or Arab Uprising, as it is sometimes called, began in Tunisia. That was 5 years ago. The unrest quickly spread through half a dozen countries in the Arab world. CCTV's Yasser Hakim has insight 5 years on.
That fateful day in Tunisia reshaped the future of the region and the fate of 3 North African leaders. One escaped and died in exile. The other was jailed, and the third killed by his own people. The people ousted their presidents for the hope of a better life. But 5 years on, it doesn't look so rosy. Libya suffered the most, with ISIL and other militias wreaking havoc in the politically divided nation. Egypt and Tunisia, however, took a different path to Libya.
The dreams of freedom weren't materialized immediately. It was the same scenario in both countries. The Islamist forces in Muslim Brotherhood took over power. What happened with the Tunisians happened with the Egyptians. They ousted the Islamists later.
But this came at a cost of lives and prolonged suffering. It also provided the fertile land for terrorism to spread. And eventually, the economies of the two countries and vital industries such as tourism were hit by the political unrest.
Where are these states from the development they seeked in their uprisings? They revolted against poverty, but we are more poor now. There is more unemployment in these countries, and they all still need to counter the growth of corruption.
Worst economically, making serious changes to its annual budget.
For a long time, Russia's economy hasn't faced such grave and simultaneous challenges: falling oil prices, sanctions pressure, and changes in the global economy.
Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev was speaking at a major annual Russian economics forum here in Moscow. Daniel Bushell's there too. Let's cross to him, see what was said. Seems the watchword is adapting to new realities, Daniel, yeah?
Well, heavy hitters of Russian and world business are there, and I must say the mood's pretty sombre. The price of oil, the bedrock of Russian industry, at 11-year lows, and that's having a serious effect. Premier Medvedev here warned it's been a while since the country faced, as you just heard, such a deadly cocktail of historic crude price lows, Western sanctions and global economic headwinds. Politics also dictates to business leaders, and certain states are putting pressure on others, he warned, hinting sanctions are politically motivated and and Washington's pressuring reluctant NATO allies to do what it wants. Medvedev said diversification away from oil and gas is urgently needed as the crisis is hitting the worst off in particular, so those who rely on state support like pensioners. Privatization of more state assets was announced to raise cash, and delegates were told oil prices are collapsing even faster than in '98 when this country had to actually default on its international debts. Let's have a listen.
Lots of people compare the current situation with the crisis of 1998, when oil prices dropped 2.5 times and the industry shrank by 40%. Now prices are falling even more rapidly.
Well, Argentina's new government is also shaking up its economy. In its first month in office, President Mauricio Macri's team has cut capital controls and dropped export taxes. Now, as it tackles overspending, thousands of jobs are being cut. And that's leading to angry street protests. CCTV's Joel Richards reports from Buenos Aires.
As job losses are announced in Argentina, this week thousands showed their support for one of the highest profile cases. The radio host and football commentator Victor Hugo Morales let go with 1 year left on his contract. This case sparked a debate over freedom of speech. Morales has been a vocal critic of the economic policies of the new government.
What we cannot conceive is that companies believe they are the only ones who can set an editorial line according to their business interests.
Just this month, the number of people who have lost their jobs is in the tens of thousands, and the unions are taking to the streets.
Protests like this are becoming increasingly common in Buenos Aires and across Argentina as news filters through of people losing their jobs in the public and private sector.
The government is acting quickly before employees reach a year on their contract, avoiding more complicated future negotiations. The government says amongst those being fired are political activists hired by the previous Kirchner administration, who they say have been freeloading at the state's expense. Vice President Gabriela Michetti recently posted on Twitter, the state is not an employment agency. Outside this protest at the Ministry of Labour, IT specialist Federico Secchi is one of the hundreds of workers to lose their job. He told CCTV he has no political affiliation and hopes to find work soon. He and his wife are expecting their first child in June. Another reason for the job cuts in the region's third largest economy, the fiscal deficit is now at 7%. President Mauricio Macri said this week his administration is aiming to boost employment through restructuring.
The more predictable and coherent the country is, the more factories will come to Argentina and more work will be generated.
The question remains how fast new jobs will be created at a time when consumer prices are rising. In the coming days, there are marches planned in support of the government, but so too, there will be more marches in protest.
Police fire tear gas to disperse protesters demonstrating against the rise in public transport fares. The government wants to increase bus fares in Sao Paulo, Brazil's largest city, from the equivalent of 80 cents to 90 cents. Inflation in the country is now more than 10%. Demonstrators say the price hike is unjustified because of the bad quality of public transport and constant strikes by workers. While there have been reports that some protesters have been throwing stones and rocks at the police, there were a few who said the police attacked them.
The police don't know how to work. They are not prepared. We were not doing anything. I was attacked with a book in my hand. Not a stone, not a bomb, a book.
The latest demonstrations could play a part in determining the outcome of the impeachment process against President Dilma Rousseff. Her popularity has been crushed by a sweeping anti-corruption investigation and the recession, Brazil's worst in more than 25 years.
Turn overseas tonight and to a new terror attack, and authorities are now saying the strategy looked a lot like Paris. Tonight, ISIS now claiming responsibility for the 7 gunmen in the heart of Jakarta, Indonesia. The gunmen targeting Westerners, striking this Starbucks during rush hour, a police station, a shopping center as well. There was panic in the streets, police shielding themselves behind a car. ABC's chief global affairs correspondent Martha Raddatz with the images coming in.
The 7 attackers believed to be affiliated with ISIS were armed with an arsenal of handguns, grenades, and homemade bombs. At 10:50 a.m., the first explosions, 2 bombs tossed into a Starbucks. Panicked customers flee. The attackers open fire. A Canadian outside killed. Moments later, a second wave. 2 attackers there, hiding by the trees, blow themselves up. As police swarm the busy shopping area, a brazen display, one of the gunmen firing randomly as he moves steadily and directly towards police officers. 11 a.m. now, more suicide attackers, 2 of them, descend on a police traffic post, killing 1 passerby and wounding a police officer. With rumors of more attacks, the streets, including those near the U.S. Embassy nearby, shut down. Police searching buildings, Americans told to shelter in place. It would be nearly 5 hours later before it was all over.
And Martha is with us live tonight. Martha, this was awful. 2 dead, 20 wounded, but with 7 heavily armed attackers, this could have been much worse.
It could have, David. It does seem clear the attackers wanted a Paris-style rampage. There had been warnings in Jakarta of a credible threat, and there were thousands of extra security forces on the streets, which may well have saved lives, David.
Security remains tight in the Indonesian capital Friday, a day after a deadly attack by Islamic State militants left 7 people dead. 5 of the casualties were suspected attackers. Broken glass and shattered windows can be seen from the location of one of the multiple blasts that shook Jakarta City. Residents say they're on edge. I feel very disturbed by what happened, this man said. The government should take extra precautions because things like this have happened in the past. Indeed, low-level strikes on police are common here, but the brazenness of this assault suggested a new brand of militancy. It's the first time IS has targeted Indonesia, the world's most populous Muslim country, where the group wants to establish an Asian beachhead for its, quote, caliphate. Police say the situation is under control, but are counting on allies to help defeat the militants.
We are chasing them, and we suppose that our counterparts in other countries also, could work together, because it is not a homegrown terrorism only in Indonesia. This is being part of ISIS network.
Indonesian authorities have been largely successful in destroying domestic militant cells in the past 10 years, but have been worried about a resurgence inspired by groups like Islamic State.
Malaysian authorities said police had raised the alert to the highest degree. Increased security measures are in place at public locations such as shopping malls and tourist spots. Extra precautionary actions will be implemented in border areas to prevent possible infiltration by terror elements. Singapore's Deputy Prime Minister Tay Chee Hean said the country has stepped up security measures, and Singapore and Indonesia have agreed to enhance cooperation for the security of the 2 countries.
The siege at a luxury hotel in Burkina Faso, which has now ended. Soldiers have freed 126 hostages and killed 3 gunmen. But it's also being reported that some attackers are now holed up in another hotel in the capital. On Friday evening, masked gunmen stormed the splendid hotel in the capital, Ouagadougou. 20 people were killed in that initial attack, and it was later reported that 10 bodies were found in a nearby cafe. Survivors described the horror they witnessed.
People were lying on the ground, and there was blood everywhere. They were shooting people at point-blank range. They set fire to the place, and the smoke started to suffocate me and the other survivors.
Everything was on fire. There was someone in front of me, and they shot him, and he fell onto me.
An Al-Qaeda offshoot in West Africa has claimed the attack. The gunmen reportedly shouted that they were carrying out revenge against France. Burkina Faso is a former colony, and French troops have taken part in freeing the hostages. Some witnesses had earlier complained that security forces were taking too long to act.
The army and the police came, but they are just turning round. We are waiting. Maybe they are preparing for something. But we know that the gunmen won't get out from the hotel alive. Our country is not for jihadists or terrorists. They are wrong.
Well, this is the hotel in question that's been attacked. It's a 4-star facility with 150 rooms, and it's popular with Westerners and United Nations staff. In an online statement, the terrorists say they hit the hotel to target foreigners. Today, their militants from the terrorist group Al-Shabaab claim to have killed 60 soldiers in Somalia. It seems they rammed a suicide car bomb into the gates of an African Union base and then fought their way through. That base is guarded by Kenyan troops, but the spokesperson for the Kenyan army couldn't confirm the number of casualties. Al-Shabaab, of course, is a terrorist organisation that's pledged allegiance to Al-Qaeda 3 years ago. They're fighting the internationally recognised federal government right now in Somalia. It's estimated that the jihadist group has up to 9,000 members. Let's get latest on this. Tamelo Motatwan is joining us now live. Hi there. Take us through what has happened here. I gave our viewers some details. Give us a bit more.
Absolutely. Well, Kevin, as you have mentioned, Al-Shabaab has run over, of course, the African Union military base in Somalia, in Kenya, killing more than 60 people, 60 soldiers to be more specific. However, as you mentioned, Kevin, that the Kenyan spokesperson cannot confirm this number. Now, witnesses, however, that have, of course, witnessed this ordeal have also mentioned that the Al-Shabaab military fighters have put their flag at the camp, of course, taking complete control of the camp, so we speak. Now, Kevin, if you remember, Al-Shabaab also took over, of course, Somalia just last year in June, killing 30 people. In September, 30 people also were killed. And in October of the same year last year, Al-Shabaab fighters also pledged allegiance, of course, with the ISIL. And they've also also occupied north of Africa in parts of Libya as well as parts of Egypt. And now they seem to have made it through to Somalia and Kenya, ensuring that they have some sort of control and foothold over Africa, specifically the east and the north.
The Navy this morning has begun debriefing the 10 United States sailors who were detained by Iran. Images broadcast on Iranian television show the service members' apparent capture at sea. One admits the crew made a mistake. The sailors were released within hours. David Martin is at the Pentagon. David, good morning.
Good morning. The speedy release of the sailors is being portrayed by the administration as the product of years of painstaking diplomacy with Iran. But critics see the incident as just one more case of Iranian provocation. Although administration officials publicly described it as a rescue at sea, video released by Iran made it look like the American sailors had been captured, forced to kneel with their hands behind their heads, and placed in front of a camera to confess.
It was a mistake. That was our fault, and we apologize for our mistake.
That seemed at odds with Secretary of State Kerry's praise for how the Iranians handled the incident.
I also want to thank the Iranian authorities for their cooperation and quick response. These are always situations which, as everybody here knows, have an ability, if not properly guided, to get out of control.
Both sides agree the two boats accidentally strayed into Iranian territorial waters. Exactly how remains unclear. After being held for 16 hours on Farsi Island in the Persian Gulf, the crew was allowed to get back in their boats and sail out to this American warship. The release came after a series of phone calls between Secretary Kerry and Iran's foreign minister, who had developed a working relationship during the long, drawn-out negotiations in which Iran agreed to suspend its nuclear program in return for relief from economic sanctions. The Iranian foreign minister tweeted he was happy to see dialogue and respect, not threats and impetuousness, swiftly resolve the sailors' episode. But some have been critical of the Obama administration, saying this is less a diplomatic success than a case of Iran having its cake and eating it too.
On the one hand, they're giving the people back in an expeditious manner, which, oh, by the way, they're required under international law to do, and take credit for that. But on the other hand, they release domestic press, which makes it sound like, well, it's the Americans screwing up, it's really their fault.
Iran's desire not to derail the nuclear agreement between the two countries may be what really resolved this. As part of that deal, the U.S. is expected to begin releasing about $100 billion in frozen Iranian assets in the next few days.
Do you give them credit because our 10 sailors have been surrendered? The ones were taken by Iran, and so quickly they have been returned to the United States.
Greta, did you see what they did to these sailors? They took pictures of them on the deck of a ship with their hands behind their back. Then they put them in a jail pen, and they made the female sailor cover her head in a scarf. They took pictures of them and video and put it up on Iranian television as if to say, look what we can do to America. We can capture their sailors. We can make them get on their knees. We can humiliate them. You know why they did this? Because they know they can get away with it. Because they know Barack Obama's weak. Because they know he won't do anything about it. I'm glad they were returned, and I'm glad that they're safe. But the humiliation they're trying to inflict on us goes beyond just that one instance. It's the firing rockets near our ships. It's the constant rhetoric.
Is he to be blamed for this, for the fact that our sailors got picked up?
I think he's to blame for the fact that Iran thinks they can get away with these sorts of things. If the right president were in charge, someone that they know is not trying to coddle them or reach out to them in a way that makes us weaker, they would have never captured them, and they would have immediately sent them back. They never. What was the point of putting them in a jail cell? What was the point of making them get on their knees and put their hands behind their back? And do you think a friendly country would have done that to America? They would have helped them fix the engine and go back on their way. Iran is not. The Iranian leadership are not friends or allies of the United States of America, and last night proves it. And they are doing this because they understand this is a weak president who will not do anything about these sorts of things.
Hear people peddling this fiction about our enemies getting stronger, America getting weaker. When you hear folks say we can, solve challenges just by looking meaner and talking tougher, or carpet bombing wherever we want, that's just hot air. It's bluster. That's why we have to reject any politics that targets people because of their race or their religion. That we have to reject. That we have to reject.
Welcome back to the special edition of Hannity, Islamists Among Us. Now, the president and his Democratic cohorts continue to insist that ISIS is not Islamic, and their refusal to identify the enemy is putting you, the American people, at risk. Take a look at this.
The terrorists do not speak for over 1 billion Muslims who reject their hateful ideology. They no more represent Islam than any madman who kills innocents in the name of God represents Christianity or Judaism. All of us have a responsibility to refute the notion that groups like ISIL somehow represent Islam, because that is a falsehood that embraces the terrorist narrative.
We are at war with violent extremism. We are at war with people who use their religion for purposes of power and oppression. And yes, we are at war with those people, but I don't want us to be painting with too broad a brush.
going to get worse, and we're going to see persecution, I believe, in this country because our president is very sympathetic to Islam. And the reason I say that, Gordon, is because his father was a Muslim, gave him a Muslim name, Barack Hussein Obama. His mother married another Muslim man. They moved to Indonesia. He went to Indonesian schools. So growing up, his frame of reference and his influences as a young man was Islam. It wasn't Christianity, Islam. And so there are Muslims that have access to him in the White House. Our foreign policy has a lot of influence now from Muslims. We see the Prime Minister of Israel being snubbed by the President and by the White House and by the Democrats, and it's because of the influence of Islam. They hate Israel and they hate Christians. And so the storm is coming, I believe, Gordon.